headquarters of Teck Metals. Today's meeting will be presented to you by our management team, Mr. William Lloyd, our Chief Ethics Officer, Mr. Ashwood Harris, our Chief Legal Counsel, Mr. Shard Shangan-Haran, our CFO, and I myself, my name is Virginia Muchang, and I am the CEO. We're here today to discuss a sizable concern to our company, a matter of irresponsibility. With a $2.8 billion price tag attached to it. We need you to make a decision today about the future of Teck Metals. As you know, Teck Metals is one of the leading mining companies in the world. These are our achievements to date. In 2013, we have become the #1 producer of steelmaking coal in North America. But despite these successes, we have a serious issue to deal with, and that is the contamination of Lake Roosevelt. Our Trellis smelter, located in British Columbia in Canada, discharged more than 10 million tons of slag into the Columbia River. These contaminants flowed down directly into Lake Roosevelt in the US for over 65 years. The impact study, which we were required to conduct by court, proved that the water contains excessive mercury, which is dangerous to the health of humans. So the people rightly pose the question, living along Lake Roosevelt, whether they can drink the water, whether they can swim in it, or eat the fish. Unfortunately, the answer to all these three questions are that no, it is not safe. The real question is for Teck Metals, though, whether we can really afford to be irresponsible. Our Chief Ethics Officer will go into more detail about the ethical impact this had on our company.
Thank you, Ms. Moche. So good afternoon, and welcome to our board. So I'm here to say today that truly, we did not own the true impact as a company of what we caused. And this shows a lack of ownership and the problems that resulted from it. Our real ethical problem, as the ethical officer, is what I'm most concerned about. It's my job and obligation to point this out. And what that is we wanted to look ethical as a company. But we did not really make it happen. And how is that? To explain that, I can say to start with, we have many policies in place. And these policies are set up so we do the right thing. As you can see from some of the wording here, we have what I call wiggle room in many of our policies. Evasive wording that, along with taking advantage of legal loopholes, we were able to continue this pollution and contamination across borders. So wording as we see here, such as guide, strive, try, and if possible, do these words really represent ownership of a situation that as a company we want to control? Truly, I'd say it reflected no ownership. And after the effects of what we caused, we neither prevented nor actively attempted to clean up the activity. So this is where our ethical dilemma lies. The real question is, why has this occurred? To start to answer that is, we truly did not want to have our names in the newspaper, such as the front page of the New York Times, or be on CNN, like with the BP oil spill. We did not want to have legal obligations, such as millions of dollars of fines and a legal precedent set for us to affect us in our future. And especially financial impacts. Financial impacts potentially from these obligations that we did not want to plan for and did not want to pay for. As we looked at this, we see, as our CEO mentioned, the major issues of being able to drink the water and eat the fish and swim, basics. These are serious environmental problems, but the biggest problem of all is what we ourselves directly caused, which is the mercury poisoning that affected those. Based on that, the impact on the community is such that they have had to live in fear. Thousands of people since the 1990s living with what they had no choice but to live with. The impact on those individual people has been some catastrophic health problems in some cases as a result of the mercury poisoning from the fish that they ate. As a company, we've invested a lot of financial and legal resources to avoid these issues, delay these issues, defer these issues. This should not continue. This is our ethical concern. So I want to express that our legal counsel, Mr. Swan Harris, will cover some of these issues from the legal perspective.
Mr. Lloyd, thank you. Inspector, board members, welcome. Esteemed board members, welcome. At Tech Medical Legal, we're here to do three things. Basically, we're here to know the law, protect us against any type of litigation, as well as make sure that we make ethical decisions based on that knowledge. Now, I guarantee you, even though I am talking about ethical decisions, I am an attorney, so I want you all to bear with me. Now, let's get started here at our timeline. 1896 is when Tech Medical began. For roughly 70 years, between 1896 and 1970, we roughly had no litigation. Now, part of that is because prior to 1970, even though they had laws protecting the environment, those laws were weakly enforced. In 1970, you had the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, as well as in 1985, you had the creation of Environment Canada in Canada. The EPA did a fairly good job, and the reason I say it is because in 1994, we were actually warned about water contamination issues in Lake Roosevelt. That group was being advised by the EPA. In 1999, we actually were taken to court by that same group. If we jump forward, we'll notice that in 2003, cross-border contamination became persecutable within the United States. Now, based on that ruling, in 2006, we were forced to do an impact study. That impact study was to judge the amount of contamination that actually streamed down from our plant in British Columbia and affected Lake Roosevelt. Based on that, in 2012, we actually lost the case. So the question here is, what is the ethical issue? The ethical issue is that for nearly 2 decades, we were irresponsible and we didn't show ownership. Let's take a look, deeper look at our timeline. Between 1994 and 1999, in 94, we were actually told about the contamination issues. In 99, we were actually taken to court. It took us 5 years to acknowledge that we had did anything wrong. And once again, we didn't acknowledge it on our own. We only acknowledged it because we were taken to court. 1999, when we were taken to court, 2006, it took us 7 years to address the issue, to actually investigate the issue, to acknowledge what it is that we had already acknowledged in terms of not doing the right thing and knowing that we contaminated Lake Roosevelt. 2006 and 2012. 2006, we had an impact study. 2012, we actually lost the case. That's an additional 6 years to be accountable. And once again, we were only accountable because we lost the case. So, in the big picture, legally, we've been on the right side of the law since 1896. But if we look at ethically, we've been on the wrong side of the law for over a lifetime. Now, our CFO is going to give you all a little bit more detail about our financial concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Our irresponsible behavior over the years had a huge financial impact. This cost us $2.8 billion, which is 2 times more than our ended profit last year. If you look at the breakup, we spent more than $1 billion, that is almost 40%, on the impact study and the cost of cleanup of Lake Roosevelt. For the legal proceedings, we spent $150 million, including the cost of litigation incurred by the opposing tribes. Most of the operational improvements were forced upon us as a consequence of fines. We had to change many of our investment plans to fund for this. We spent $1.5 billion on that as well. For a company as big as ours, financial planning is extremely crucial. As you know, most of these expenditures were unplanned. It had a huge impact on us. This uncertainty affected the liquidity and working capital management. These are resources that we would have invested elsewhere for our expansion. So the opportunity cost towards this is considerable. At this juncture, we are trying to expand to many geographic locations. The legal battles had a huge intangible loss, such as bad brand image, the repercussions of which may definitely affect these expansion plans, such as the public protests against our operations in Alaska. From a financial perspective, this is unsustainable, completely unsustainable. A complete waste of resources that we cannot go with in future. In future, we should allocate our resources carefully, curb the unplanned expenditure, and protect our brand value. Let me pass it on to our Chief Ethics Officer for the recommendation framework.
Thank you, Mr. Shagana. So this really, the ethical future of our company begins here with us. To start with, we need to really and truly own and resolve the legacy issues that we had with our trail operation. What that means is we need to finish what we have started, which is the cleanup activity without delay, without deferral, and just make it happen. Again, we've had a lot of company resources that we now need to put behind us, put these issues behind us, and allow us to move forward. And going forward, there is a definite strong link between ethics as a company and success as a company. And what we have to say about this is that some short-term investment now will provide long-term ethical leadership for us into the future, into our future. I would like to introduce what is going to be our 3-tier action plan. The idea behind this is that this is what will guide us to being an ethical corporate citizen and being able to pave the way for what we need to be and provide back the value without issues, without worrying about the past. Internally, we essentially want to implement prevention. What this means is, with our company policies, as I mentioned before, we have the wiggle room. Going forward, we will strongly word these to be what they should be, such as commitment to prevent as opposed to what we had before. Commitment to prevent dirtying the water. Also on the prevention side will be training and compliance systems. So our employees, all employees at all levels, are properly trained and that we can track and verify that they are following the policies. And then with our operations, to have strong technology improvements on an ongoing basis, again to prevent contaminants from occurring into our environment. The second tier of our action plan is collective action. What that means is we will be looking at setting higher industry standards compared to our past of leveling the playing field with bad practices. We will work with case studies in associations, conferences, workshops to be able to identify what best practices truly are, implement those ourselves, and then once we have those in place in our operations, to lead the way with industry associations for our whole industry to follow. For the community, the key is that we are directly and proactively engaged with them. This is important so both ourselves and they, as our communities, know that we are doing what is the right thing for them, as well as our business, and not only our business. One example of this is alert systems. Even though we have prevention in place, accidents can still happen. We want to make sure that we have systems that will tell us if something goes wrong, so we can immediately catch it and prevent any contaminants or issues from leaking out in our community. These other elements we see here, a hotline, will be a direct contact from our community into us, so they can raise any questions, concerns, perceptions that they have, and we can address those immediately. A community relations officer at all of our locations to work directly with those communities. And then for the people overall to educate them on what we as a company do, how we do it, how we've safeguarded them, and invite them to visit our operations anytime so they can see what we do and the proof that we are actually doing it. So overall, with those three main tiers of an action plan going forward, this sets us up to truly be ethical in our behavior and what we say we do and actually doing it. Truly by walking the talk. And the essence of that is truly taking ownership of what we should have had ownership for all along and to have it going forward. So to address the legal perspective of this action plan, turn over to Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Okay, these recommendations are pretty clear cut, so we're going to zoom right through these. In support of Mr. Lloyd, we're following a three-tier action plan. We're going to explain these action plan and put it in terms of the legal aspect. So let's first look at it internally. What we want to do is implement strong internal controls, tracking towards compliance. Simply what that means is we want to make sure that any policies that we create, that they actually are mimicking the laws that's being followed externally. Secondly, we want to make sure we implement research and response protocols with completed dates. In the past, that's why we were unethical. It took us far too long to make sure that to recognize the wrong that we were doing in the community. Secondly, collective action. We want to make sure that we're a part of collective teams. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to partner with industry participants. What we're going to do is we're going to create higher industry standards. As we create those higher industry standards, we're going to take those to regulators. We're going to let that inform regulators in terms of the laws that's coming up that's going to affect our field. Lastly, the community. We want to make sure that we work with our community representatives and have them work very closely with council. That way we can make sure that their concerns don't turn into warnings, and that the warnings don't turn into lawsuits. Our CFO will tell you the rest of our financial concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. We evaluated the financial impacts of this proposed trigger action plan. Definitely, this will need some resources upfront. However, in the long run, this will make perfect financial sense. We expect this to give a tangible benefit of $375 million in the next 2 years from a very conservative estimate. For the internal thing, we should consider 2 phases. One is the training and compliance team. For the recommendations made by the ethics officer, we have budgeted $7 million for establishing a compliance team as well as proper training of all our employees for preventing any human error. For technology, we are planning to invest $223 million this year. This includes the investments in research and development, the recycling and the water treatment investments. If you look over here, this table shows up the split in which we are going to invest our $223 million. In next 2 years, this will have an inflow of $650 million, which means a benefit of $427 million. If you want, we can discuss this in detail later. For collective action for higher industry standards, we are planning to invest $5 million this year. For community, we are planning to invest $40 million to ensure that we have a system for continuous impact analysis and other recommendations made by the ethics officer. Altogether, this will have an upfront investment of $275 million. In the next 2 years, this will bring us $375 million as net benefit. Apart from this, this also has a huge amount of intangible benefits for us, which we cannot tag any monetary value now. This holistic approach sets our future in the right direction. Let me invite our CEO for the future outlook of our company.
Thank you. Going forward, we as the management team are convinced that we need to change the way we're doing business. It just makes business sense. We will create and drive shareholder value. Being an ethical company will benefit us financially, as you heard, but it also will benefit us in many other ways. There are many numerous intangible benefits to it. Just to mention a few, we will be able to acquire environmental rights in much less time. But also, looking at the future, we would like to transform Teck Metals into a forward-looking, best-in-class company. A company you and us can be proud of. A company who is, of course, a good corporate citizen. A company who is leading by example. And a company who is a good corporate citizen. We ask you, therefore, as a board, to cast your vote in favor of implementing the 3-tier action plan, in favor of implementing an ethical business culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. It's time for some Q&A, and as chairman of the board, I'd like to begin. Now, we've been working with you and your team for 15 years now. We've paid you handsomely, cash, bonuses, stock. I'm shocked that this is the first we're hearing of this, and you're asking for these kinds of investments. By the morning, unless you can give me a very good reason, I would like all of your resignations.
May I answer?
Yes, please.
Unfortunately, our board has been in place just for the past 2 years, and this has been a long story where we got to know what has actually happened at our company. We started investigating all the lost and all the lawsuits which were going on. Our legal advisor, who's very new to this, he has been on for the past half year, so he was confronted with everything. And I think he managed very well to say, this is the point where we have to change. And he clearly said to us that as the management, these are the legal actions we should be taking. Mr. William Lloyd, our Chief Ethics Officer, we didn't have a compliance system in place until now. We didn't have a Chief Ethics Officer until now. So I think looking forward, this is the only way we can resolve the issues. And we have hired actually the new management who will be looking at this forward. They need a chance, of course, and a couple of months or half a year is not enough to change everything.
As a CFO, can I add some more thing on that?
Of course.
This will definitely bring in more revenue for the company in the near future. We are looking, with this, we are not just being ethical. It's perfect financial sense as well. We are looking at a benefit of $375 million if we are going in this path in the next 2 years.
Is it your, I guess I'll address this to the CEO, is it your sense that our company has really been operating illegally for almost 100 years?
It hasn't operated illegally because there were no regulations in place and they were not enforced. Additionally, as our legal counsel pointed out, the cross-border litigation did not exist. So as a Canadian company, we were not bound by law in the US. So the US law did not apply to us.
But Canadian law did apply.
The Canadian law did apply.
And so is it your sense that you operated in Canada illegally under Canadian law.
No, legally, we operated under Canadian law.
Well, you polluted water and streams and the environment in Canada, and it was only by happenstance that years later it became illegal
Yes,
in the U.S.?
from the technical point of view.
Okay, so if that's the case, what have you been doing? What have you been doing for these 100 years of our company's existence to try to operate legally in the state of in the country of Canada?
Provide some context.
Yep.
Can I provide some context here?
Sure.
I think prior to the recent past, the laws were localized. Because they were localized, we broke no laws in the United States or in Canada. In Canada, what they thought, or what we thought, was that the contamination flowed downstream, so there wasn't a buildup. So we had no reason to think that it would be a buildup in the United States. But because it reservoir in Lake Roosevelt and it didn't flush out to sea, the contaminants built up. And once they built up to a certain amount, that measurable amount began to contaminate the stream of water, the food supply, as well as the recreational areas of those people in the United States.
So the company operated without legal challenge, therefore you believed it to be legal?
Well, it was without legal challenge, but also, would you like to answer?
Sure.
But also what happened was we basically took the stance that everything that we did prior to was within the confines of the law, and the proactive steps that we took were good enough. And so we didn't know that they were not good enough until the EPA and Environment Canada was formed. And once they were formed, new laws were passed. And based on those laws, we ended up on the wrong side of legal issues.
All right, so it only became an ethical problem for you after we lost the case last year? Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't put it that way because we were not aware of it. So because there were no impact studies made, when the contaminants flowed downstream, we didn't know that there is a certain level of mercury which is allowed, basically. So we didn't know this is above the level.
It's hard for me as a board of director member to understand or to get my arms around the ethics problem that you've identified and the legal problem. I'm not seeing that there's a distinction, or I'm seeing, if there is one, that you shined everything on until you lost the case. You believe, as management, that you were doing everything right until 2012. And then all of a sudden, the illegality of the court system makes you believe that you have an ethical problem. That's what spurs management. It wasn't that anything else happened years ago that spurred you to think that there was an ethical problem. It was only a court decision.
Sure. No, I'd be happy to answer. So as the ethical officer, fairly recent into the position, but basically what I discovered when I first came into the company is seeing some disconnected pieces of actions, discovery information that showed, okay, the company knew up through the 90s, sometime in the mid-1990s, that this operation process, contaminant discharge into the river was occurring. The belief in the company for that 60, 70 some years was that material was just being diluted downstream and basically washing out to sea, so to speak. In a series of preventive steps, some operational improvements were made, and various programs and some of these policies I mentioned were being put in place. But the real crux of the matter is there were so many different activities that weren't well coordinated. They weren't well integrated. And based on that, and in the mid-90s going forward, was when some of these legal situations started to come to light. So we'd already identified the fact that we shouldn't do this anymore, but we were truly hoping that we could go forward with the improvements and changes we were making rather than worrying about what happened in the past. But it turned out the pollution that happened in the past was collecting across the border And that when that was brought to our attention through the first lawsuit case, that's when we realized we have more of an issue than we thought.
So let me ask the legal officer, if we had won the case in 2012, would you still be presenting a three-pronged action plan?
I think it would. And the reason being is because, go back to a statement made earlier, as a company, we take full responsibility. The buck stops with us as a management team. But as a management team, we also take full responsibility for this plan. And this plan would have been implemented because now we're aware that there was an issue. Even if we would have won the case, now we're aware that there's an issue. And that's the ethical part. And that's why we're an ethical management team. If we knew and made no changes, then we would continue to be unethical. We would continue the unethical practices of our predecessors. But that's not what we're here to do. We're here to tell you that prior to now, we have made some wrong decisions, but now we're ready to make some right decisions.
Thank you.
Exactly.
You want to change the language from the looseness to tying up our company up to a strict policy. If somebody was to spill something onto the ground and it was an accident, and we have these policies in place, wouldn't we harm ourselves in the long run by creating a standard so strict that it will force us in the long run to lose money and possibly hurt us and shrink our company or even put us out of business because we have set ourselves up on a higher standard than any other company? Isn't that a problem?
That's a very good question. Certainly the tightening or raising the bar of any goals like we propose and are asking for is going to be difficult in the beginning. But the concept is already supposedly in place. It's just a matter of making it truly the attitude and belief that that's what we should be using, as opposed to an escape clause. In other words, we'll try it if it's easy, but if it becomes difficult, we won't do it at all. There's certainly going to be situations where we have to understand that certain situations are minor or an accident within the company that doesn't affect the external community or the environment. If it's contained within Techmetal's walls, so to speak, or our operations, then that's something that may be more acceptable. But again, the whole idea is that we prevent activity, negative activity, pollution, contamination, through more efficient processes, process improvements, better capability, and then that way we don't have to worry about what may go wrong.
So what you're telling us is that we already have a mechanism in place, but you, running the company, have failed to enforce what we have assumed as the policies to ensure safeguards. You're allowing, are you turning a blind eye to environmental issues that we're not aware of?
So definitely not a blind eye. I think this is our statement as a management team to say we want to enforce the right behavior from all our employees at all levels without any room for evasion. So say this is a commitment that we make as a company to ourselves, to our management, to our employees. We don't want to take risks of safety, for example, with our employees. If an employee comes to the job every day, we don't want to tell the person next to them, well, do the best you can to be safe. And if you have an accident and hurt your colleague, well, that may go away. We don't want to do that with our own people. We can't do that with our external stakeholders that we rely on every day.
Sir, just to cap on the question, just one statement, just going to cap on. As I listen to you, I think one of the issues here is more so that change takes time. So we're not turning a blind eye, we're really embracing change. But what that change is going to do is that change is going to take a couple of years to actually be implemented. So that's what you see now. You see that we started this a couple of years back when we became a management team. But it's not going to be coming to fruition for a little while down the road. So it's not a blind eye, it's just that it's taking more time. That you all would like and we would like.
A couple of questions related to all the changes you're proposing. Are you proposing any organizational changes, number one, and number two, have you set aside any money for financial reserves for unseen issues?
Briefly, maybe you should speak up. Or
I
just
start
have
out,
one comment.
No further organizational, of course, we would like to restructure. I mean, the first was to have a compliance and ethic officer in general, and he will have managers all at the sites. So we are operating in Canada, in the US, in Peru, in Chile. So at each facility we have, we will make sure that the employees are trained and they know. So there is a new system we're putting in place which did not exist until now. And of course it takes some time to train everyone. And secondly, our CFO can mention to you, of course, it's an important issue to have some reserves. We are clear that we want to prevent these kind of issues from occurring again. And we have allocated a budget for it, but we still believe that we can put the systems in place, especially the technology improvements, which will allow us to prevent this kind of things from happening.
One of the actions from our point of view this year would be the plan to invest. There are many innovations that's happening in the field of copper mining. As you know, copper is almost 45% of our business, and the mining process in Canada is not so efficient as of now. There are many innovations that are happening in a company known as Ibecc, that's a South African company, that's looking for investments to commercialize this application. For the initial studies, it will improve the mining process by at least 2 times per the existing standards. If we are investing in that, we are looking at a long-term benefit of $125 million in the next 2 years. So this one action that we are doing, this will make our mining plants more sustainable because we can use it for more years when the process improves. One action towards that direction this year.
Kind of jumping off of your comments there. I kind of see that we have, what do you think the root cause is? Do you think it's a technology that we didn't know was being contaminated and now we have that knowledge and that's great? Or was it an ethical or cultural issue that we knew it was happening and we said, oh, we don't care about it? Which of those two do you think it was? Was it a technology or was it a culture issue?
First of all, we never looked for innovations as such. We had our mines, we were one of the biggest mining companies, we were sitting on our laurels and using and exploiting the mine so far. If we wanted earlier, we could have put money on innovation. That's how for sustainable mining, if we had put investments on our R&D earlier, we wouldn't have so much pollution as of now.
So a quick follow-up on that is, if you're saying it's a technology one, why do we need an ethics officer? Why do we need to spend $45 million on increasing our brand if we can put $230 million into new technologies? We're not going to have another problem. We've solved it. We have the technology to say we're not going to contaminate it, so we don't need him, and we don't need a legal guy, and we don't need to spend all this money on all this other stuff.
Copper mining is just one part of our business. Where we, as a 3-tier action plan, we're looking at a holistic approach in which there are areas that needs to be addressed on the ethics sides as well, especially in the case that he was mentioning earlier. And one arm of it is the technology improvement that we can bring in so that we can have sustainable mining. It's just one arm of it, not the entire arm. Because as the CEO earlier mentioned, we will have a lot of intangible benefits in the near future. We are not just looking at the short-term profits for our company. We are looking at the company to stand there as an industry leader for the next hundreds of years. So for that, his role is very crucial.
Let me add.
Yes.
Hang on, board member, next question.
Yes.
I'm all for the idea of trying to put some measures in place to make sure that we don't end up in the same position position again, but my concern is that some of your recommendations and some of your suggestions are going way too far, and specifically in regard to the outreach to the community. I mean, the way I look at it, you're essentially asking the company to go into the community and fall on its sword and admit total responsibility, while at the same time telling them, you know, hey, we're responsible for poisoning your water in the past, and oh, by the way, we have these special alerts because we may be poisoning your water in the future. So my question is, isn't that an offset to some of the cost savings that you're talking about, where there would be a damage to the brand, and you're essentially asking these people to, you know, sue us again because you're telling them, you know, we're responsible, and by the way, you know, we may do it again. Can you comment on that?
So I'll cover first. You may want to add to it, respectively. But essentially, the concept of having these relations officers and going deeper to the community is, for one, we have an old historic issue that needs to be resolved and cleaned up, that we've let go on historically for too long. So that's just one location. What we really have is global locations, and many of them, and some of them with very high risk, high potential risk processes of just as much bad, if not worse, contaminants that could leak out from the processes. That being the case, we want to work with these communities so they know that we're just not something along the lines of the big mining company that doesn't care about anybody else except us and our profits. Of course, we care about that, but we have to be sustainable in it, using that word to mean if we don't show that level of care and interest in our communities that we operate in, eventually those communities are going to drive their governments and their countries to get us out of it. We won't have an operation anymore. And if that happens, we may not have an exit plan. We may not have a backup plan on where we can go to sustain our operations. And if we have a situation like that, we may not be able to contain it.
Unfortunately, we're out of time for Q&A. I strongly encourage you to take a deep breath. So. Feedback time. John?
I think you were all very, very articulate. Enjoyed the slides. I think that perhaps the slides could be a little bit more detailed on the problem itself. Saw the slides as a lot more, what does a compliance or an ethics program look like, and not as much about your identified problem or the pollution or the harm to the environment. So, from my perspective, I can see the ethical idea of being a good citizen, especially in other countries or other locations where you have facilities. But I'm still bothered as a board member about how come you're so late coming to the idea that you need an ethics program. It's just sort of unbelievable that an experienced management team that you're presenting yourself would wait 10, 12, 30 years before coming to the idea that you owed some obligation to the community to be sure that you were including the environment. Perhaps you could strengthen that part of the presentation so that the board members are getting a feel for why the management team is so late coming to the table.
The Prezi presentation need more information. Something concrete. Halfway through, I don't use them because it's just too distracting. But at one point I thought, could you give a presentation without this at all? If the power went down, could you give a presentation? Because I was thinking it was keeping you on cue. That's all. As for the content, I'm still trying to figure out, well, I'm not asking for your resignation. That's not a bad idea. I mean, I'm just, I give me resignations. trying to figure out still, by wetting us, by strengthening the language to prevent removal, to allow for maneuverability, I just see that as a dangerous thing. You haven't convinced me yet on that part. And I'm also wondering, because I was thinking, you said 2 to 4 years, I think 2 years to turn around, to look at the company. When Marcioni went into Chrysler, he didn't wait 2 years. He didn't have that time. He went in there and cleaned house. He wiped out half of the board, got rid of the old people, brought in new thinkers, and the company's Chrysler's thriving right now. And then you know that it's selling cars that has a Jeep company in Canada and Mexico, and they're planning to build a plant in China. So I think that 2-year time period, why is it, in my mind, I'm going, it's taking too long. We need to move quicker. And also, yeah, somebody landing on the sword. I see just opening ourselves to so much lawsuits. I don't even know if we have the money. I mean, I saw the numbers, I'm like 200 some million, and that's nothing compared. $2 million. Yeah, I'm like, that's still not enough. Someone's gonna ask for that just alone. So, presentation style, clear, I like it. I like how you guys did the transition, smooth. I really enjoyed that. For some reason, you're wearing the red tie. I'm like focusing on the red tie. I don't know why. It's the little things I look at.
We needed to match.
No, I wasn't sure. So, but thank you.
Before you leave, I want a tutorial on your slides. I thought they were great. I really, yeah. go ahead.
This is one of our questions, our main questions. The Prezi, originating and created in Hungary, where our university is, of course. How much has the audience seen this?
I've never seen it before, and I love it. I just thought it was true. So that's that aside. I thought you guys were all very poised, very persuasive in your presentation style. You're engaging, really good connection here. I thought the minimalist slides, not a lot of text, made us focus. Okay, there's an image there, I get that, and now you're telling me what's behind that. I find that very effective. So that kind of presentation style is terrific. I really enjoyed the presentation. You know that in our roles, pretending to be the board of directors while you're pretending to be management is to shake you up. And see if we can rattle you a little bit. We did. You stayed on message. You were consistent. Congratulations.
Okay, I guess I'll go next. I'll take a different approach here. Question first and then some comments. Why did, of all the topics you could have chosen, why did you choose this one?
This was of interest because it was a global, multinational operation country in operating and causing a problem in 2 very developed countries. This is the kind of issue that you would think would happen somewhere where nobody's paying attention to, the outer regions of China or wherever. But this was happening between British Columbia and the state of Washington, from Canada to the US. It was very, very, very visible Western country activities.
So this is a real world case.
And going, yes.
Okay. The reason I ask is because the alternative seems so difficult, and to me, I think the corrective actions are so either painful or require a totally different approach. And I try not to disagree. I mean, I try to always push people, but I didn't get a sense that there was detail here that addressed the corrective actions. So a lot of stuff like presentation, many positive things, but my orientation, I'm responsible for auditing parts of the company, and things can get very involved. I didn't get that sense here. I'll just leave it at that. Otherwise, I thought it was very well done.
I struggle, I think, picking management and a board, you're instantly going to get this conflict. So that's a challenging thing. And so starting with that premise, you guys kind of you're digging yourself out of the hole, because instantly everyone says the corrective, and just get rid of all of it. And then a presentation that's kind of moving, that's upbeat, it's like, this isn't upbeat. Like, you're telling me some bad information. So that premise, you might want to put, say, like, we're the new management brought in because of the lawsuit, and now we're moving forward, and these are the things we're going to do. I think you would have taken a lot less questions about everything that happened in the past, because it's kind of like the company rolled the dice, they lost, and we're the new management coming in, and this is how we're going to move this company forward. And the ethical issue becomes like, are we as the board willing to spend the money to bring this company back up on the map? I think it would have brought kind of the presentation back and got you away from angry board member, which I've seen many times in business, dealing with a board member like that. It's just like, what? Just, you're fired. Like, so, but everything else, the presentation, I thought, the transitions, everything else was very good. I think it was just, that premise was really hard to dig out of, you know, from the start, and but everything else was good.
A lot of what I had to say has already been said, but likewise, I thought you were extremely well-spoken, very professional, very polished presentation. I thought that was excellent. I liked the minimal slides myself, actually, for the reasons you said about, you know, you quickly gather, oh, this is where they're going, and then the focus is back on you instead of sitting there reading a bunch of detail. And I don't know to what extent you can be congratulated or criticized for the premise you pick, because it's an interesting subject matter. But I would tend to say, good job taking on something that is challenging, because it is challenging to go in there and say, hey, you know, we've been at this company 2 years, and I'm proposing this radical thing that involves an admission of responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. So it is tough, and I like that, because it's not a layup for you. The one point I would make, though, is, and I think no matter what the premise is you have to remember who the audience is, and that the goal here is to be persuasive. So you're trying to convince these people, this board, that you have a plan and it's a good plan. And my concern would be that your presentation started and for some time was somewhat of a negative experience. And presumably, if it's the board of directors, a lot of these people probably were on the board when all this was going sour, and they were probably watching the litigation. They probably don't think, you know, they think the company should have won the litigation, because everybody thinks that, right? You're always in the right in litigation. So they don't agree with your premise that, oh, because we lost the litigation, therefore we need to accept. They don't want to accept responsibility. I mean, rightly or wrongly. So when you open it and you hit that second slide and it's irresponsibility, that's, to me, an issue if your goal is to persuade me or persuade the board, when really you can probably work with the language and convey the same message, but more in a positive sense. So not that the company's been wrong, the company is wrong, and everything we did was wrong and bad, etc. It's more honed in on, look, we can make things better, and moving forward, it's going to be better, and we're going to be responsible. You don't have to say you've been irresponsible. You can just say, you're being, you know, we're going to be responsible, we're going to own this, we're going to move forward, it's going to pay for itself, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I thought it was an excellent presentation.
Thanks, guys.